My name is Linda Williams. I was born Linda Wilson in 1958 and I was born and bred in Washington. When I was first born, came home from hospital, we lived at Barmston Ferry, which is down Cox Green, which is where the ferry would go over. Now, the bridge was built round about the time I was born. I've got photographs of me on that bridge as a little girl. My claim to fame from there is my family are the Frosts, my mum's dad's side of the family. So the Frosts ran the ferry. There was two brothers, John, who was the elder one, and Cornelius, who was my granddad. So John ran the ferry and owned it, but Cornelius, Corny as he was called, would do some of the ferrying across the river. Corny also worked in the Newell's factory. So during the war, he was never called up, and he operated part of the Home Guard. So part of it was around there. So it was quite nice for us as a family living down there initially because housing was tight at the time. My parents were lucky to get that property until we could then move into a council property. We moved to 372 Coach Road Estate, and then we moved to 371 Coach Road Estate, so moved from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom initially. So it was really nice to have those links, but to have your family provide a home for you is really good. It was fabulous, and my little claim to fame has been a ferryman's granddaughter.
That's fantastic. So do you remember much about your granddad and about what the house was like when you were growing up?
The house we lived in is no longer there. It's what is the conservatory of the property down there. Quite bizarrely, it was my mum, that was the happiest place she ever was. And she ever enjoyed. So sadly, when she died, we scattered her ashes down there. Now, the guy who lives in the end house would come out when we go down, and there's a little place behind the house which is sort of open woodland that we go up. And we still go there occasionally and stand and just look out, and it's such a beautiful view. The house below, which is now just the one house, which at the time was 3 when we lived there, and you look just across the river to the Oddfellows Arms, which was there when I was a little girl, and those houses across there. It's just such a beautiful, calm little place. It does smell a bit. Never noticed the smell, I guess, when I was little, but it's just lovely. It's a nice little quiet piece of history.
And so you could, when you stand there, you can really just sense yourself back there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's just lovely. Been down there, and there's been things like little robins turn up or something like that. And it's, feels as if my mum's coming back.
That's fabulous. So your mum, was she, did she work, or was she sort of like the classic sort of Geordie housewife?
No, my mum used to sew. She initially, when she left school, worked for Bins as an upholsteress. When we were born, she would do sewing from home. She'd make loose covers, how everyone had loose covers on their stuff. And then she moved on to making clothes. She would make clothes for things. She'd made wedding dresses, all sorts of stuff. So my earliest memories are sitting with my mum sewing and me making clothes for my doll out of the bits that she had left. So I've always been used to sewing. So it's really something. But, when you get to the point, you think, I'm not going to do sewing and stuff like that. So at school, I chose metalwork and woodwork rather than sewing because I wasn't going to be that typical girl. Yeah. Now I sew and bake and make cakes and all that sort of thing. But it was just that little bit of resistance towards what it was. So, yeah, my mum always worked. My dad initially worked down the pit. Then he worked at Newell's. And then when I was a teenager, we moved to Springwell Social Club. Oh, right. And my dad was the steward there for a while. So I've worked behind the bar since being about 13. And I used to love it. That sort of restricted having friends, and being in Springwell was that little bit further out. But it was good. We left the club after my dad punched a customer on New Year's Eve. We were evicted.
Oh dear.
But at this time, my mum was having issues with her back. And when she was 40, she had an operation which left her paraplegic. So I think part of that was around what was happening with my dad as well. So we then moved to Glebe as a family into a 3-bedroom disabled property, purpose-built for somebody with a disabled adult. So we had 2 bedrooms upstairs for me and my brother, and downstairs was a big bathroom, living room, kitchen, and bedroom for me, mum and dad. So it turned out.
That's fantastic, because I'm thinking it must have been challenging as a family to be dealing with that. I mean, did it feel like your childhood was kind of interrupted a little bit by that?
It was, I suppose you do things and then you look back and wonder, could it have been different? And yes, I think it potentially could. So I didn't go through all the going out and drinking. Although we did move when I was 17 when we moved to Glebe. So it was, those teenage years, I didn't do what I suppose other teenagers would do now, because it was very much about making sure that things ran. My dad thought I would leave school and become stewardess so he could continue. I was determined I wasn't going to do that, and I went to work for a bank. Then, as I say, we were evicted and moved down to Glebe.
Mm-hmm. So Glebe, what year would that be roughly?
We must have moved about 1975. So
the houses would be brand new?
We moved brand new in. Now that house isn't there anymore. Wow. Because, Glebe was redeveloped in certain parts because of some of the issues around the way Glebe was built. So there was the walkover which went into Glebe, and it took you past some houses, which brought us into our street, which was Newstead Court. We lived in 72, so 72 to, I can't remember, but probably about 100 and odd. Maybe it's not quite that. We're all cleared because of the issues around the walkway and people throwing stuff over. So, I mean, one funny story. My mum was paraplegic, lived on her own, and this particular night she'd got a knock off the police to sort of say, where were you earlier on? She said, well, in bed. Have you got any evidence? Well, no, I'm on my own. So how can we prove you were here? And they were asking because a man had been found murdered further down the road. I mean, in reality, how could she have got off her bed, got into her wheelchair, wheeled herself along the street and murdered somebody? But I suppose
they had to tick the box.
They did. So it took a while. Then my mum moved to Byland Court in Glebe. Unfortunately, she only lived there from May to November when she died. So the houses that are on there now, and there's a one right on the corner, as a councillor for that area, we got the opportunity to put names in for those. So we named Princess Anne Court and Gertrude Court. Princess Anne looking at the park, but Gertrude, we were going to go for Bell Court, but we couldn't have Bell because there's a Bell Street. So that's why it's Gertrude Court. So it's in recognition of Gertrude Bell. Now that house on the corner, which is where my mum's house was, my daughter, one of my daughter's friends has just bought it.
Wow.
So it's really weird. So I'm hopefully going to get in and have a look at what was on that house. So we had the Glebe pub, which was just up there with a lovely fire. That was fabulous. Actually, there was one day a bus ran into the wall and nearly came into the house.
Oh my word!
When we're living there.
Wow.
Very, very weird. Lots of stuff going on.
So can you remember when that was? I might be able to find a photo.
Well, my dad died in 1980 and it was probably a couple of years before that. So it would be late 70s, So a bus that just was coming down and must have missed the path and came straight in and ploughed into the wall.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
It was, I did enjoy living there.
Yeah.
It was during that time that I got married and obviously moved out of there.
So we've got to the stage where we're talking about you getting married and things. But before we get to that, can I take you back to, obviously we're interested in Washington as a new town.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be, what, about 6 when the town was designated?
Yes, I was at school. Obviously, we lived at Coach Road Estate, so I attended Highsworth Infant and Junior schools. At that point, nobody took you to school. Yeah. Everybody took you there. Now, just as a total coincidence, Highsworth Infant and Junior School was rebuilt. It's now George Washington Primary, which is where my granddaughter attends. So it's really quite strange when I walk her to school. I take her into the entrance. The houses that are built there was our playing field, and I would take my little brother up, and I can remember me going into the juniors, which was where the houses are. No, that was the infants, sorry, and me going into the juniors, which is where the George Washington School is now, and sort of giving him a hug and setting him on that way, and me going into the other side. So it's really quite surreal. Yeah. That school's gone, but also my secondary school is gone as well. I was with Comprehensive, opened as a first comprehensive in the area in 1974. So I attended there. Strange memories from that, in that the first half term, kids were scrolling all over the walls, that it was painted up to about what you might think is a high dado rail to stop that, and that was just within the first year. So I attended there from 69 to 74, and I left. The following year, the fire happened. I didn't set it. My brother was still there. I can remember we were living at Springwell at the time, and he was clapping his hands saying, yeah, I'll not have to go to school, which was quite strange. Then another sort of coincidence as you move around, lots of the children from there were sent to Cllr Community Academy, which I'm now chair of governors of. So it's really quite strange that everything sort of pulls together. So the two schools I went to are both knocked down. The college is on the site of what was the Comprehensive, and George Washington is where my primary school was.
That's amazing. And actually, I'm quite impressed. You know, you were saying about being able to take woodwork and metalwork. That was quite forward thinking at the time, wasn't it?
I think that was to do with it being the first comprehensive.
Yeah.
So rather than, I didn't want to do all of that bit, and we did get that option. I can remember quite enjoying the woodwork, but the one thing with metalwork was we had copper, which you etched with acid, so we made a bangle, etched with a pattern.
Yeah.
So it was good, and really that's the way it should be as well.
Oh, totally agree.
But I remember in textiles, it would be called sewing then, because I'd always sewn. Part of the project was I was making a dress, so I never tacked, because my mum never tacked anything. I remember doing this dress and taking it in, the teacher saying, I haven't seen you tack, and I said I didn't tack it. No, you're going to have to unpick it all and tack it and show me the tacking, and then you can re-sew it. And I think that was part of the idea. Well, I'm definitely not taking sew because I can do it better than you.
Exactly. Yeah. When it comes down to that, were you aware that you were part of this kind of experiment in like comprehensive education? You know, that it was new. Was it ever emphasised to you? Or?
I can remember picking up bits from school, and I do think that gave us those extra opportunities. For example, we had a swimming pool, which was most unusual. Not that I particularly liked swimming, but it seemed as if there was a lot of money thrown at the school because it was new, and it was quite different and quite exciting. So yeah, it was certainly, it seemed to be the way to go. And rather than have grammar and secondary modern, which was definitely quite, you split kids at that point and they can't move, whereas in a comprehensive system you go in and you can move around dependent on how you are. So I do think that meets kids' needs better. And the majority of, our schools in Washington are comprehensive. And I think that's really good, because children have to learn to be part of a whole wider society. I mean, I became involved in schools. My eldest son's 40, and it wasn't long after he was born. There was a public meeting at Biddick to talk about there being no sixth form provision in Washington, and that was taking it away. And I remember feeling absolutely incensed that my baby would not be able to go to sixth form in Washington. And he hasn't, and he didn't. None of my 3 children did. But at that point, then there was a strike over teachers covering lunchtimes. So that was at the point where dinner staff were brought in. So I became a governor when Kevin was 7. With that in mind, thinking all of this stuff is just not right for children, and I've been a governor ever since.
That's fantastic. So have you seen a lot of change over time since then?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at what the curriculum was when Kevin was first at school, if it snowed, you could go out and build snowmen and do all of these exciting things. The curriculum is extremely tight now. And if you look at the pressure on some of our young people, they know at 7 the correct use of apostrophes, which was something, when I think back to, I don't think I would ever have learned till secondary school. Some of the methods and some of the things that young children are asked to do is amazing, but a lot of them do rise to the challenge, and they're fabulous.
It feels to me like you've got a real sense that, of Washington as somewhere to be proud of, as your home, as it's a real strong sense of belonging.
I love Washington. I don't particularly want to live anywhere else. It might sound quite parochial, but I think we've got everything. We can walk to places. We very much can go to the coast. It is very close. I mean, I was in Lambton, which I'm also chair of governors at recently, and talking to a group of children with some staff about geography. And the children were asked, where do you live? So they knew they lived in the city of Sunderland. They know Washington is their town. And then they were asked, is it a coastal or a rural area? And in my mind, I'm sitting thinking, well, it's rural, but it's coastal, because when you look at the city, it's coastal on the side. And afterwards, I said to the head, you live in Sunderland, that's why you think it's coastal. I says, I think of it as rural because we have so much green space over here. It's quite odd, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Yeah. You've mentioned Newells a couple of times. Were you kind of aware of that great big sort of, the white heap that everybody
Absolutely.
talks about?
There's photographs of sort of where we used to live with that big white heap, but at the time with Newells, you left school and you worked for the council, you went down the pit, or you went to Newells. That was pretty much the options, and nobody saw the risks at that point. My granddad, Corny, died at, I think he just retired, so he's probably 60, and he died of asbestosis, which was very common. But at the time, they were working in environments where asbestos was flying all over the place. Even my dad, for the few years he worked there, again, there wasn't the safety and the risk assessments around now. So it's really difficult. I can understand why, and I see how time moves on and things are different. But there must have been a lot of people who were affected by that, because it was just there, it was part of it. But at the time, nobody took it as a serious entity, and that there are still people who are fighting for compensation for that element. But at the time, it was work, and it was useful work, and it needed to be done. So then you have Teal Farm, which was built on there. And there's different ways of looking at that as well. Personally, I wouldn't live there because I've got those sort of family concerns, if you like. But I can understand why people do live there. You get a decent house for a good price.
Yeah. It's so interesting because, if you're from outside of the area and you haven't heard of Newells, you would walk through Teal Farm and go, oh, this is nice. Near the river.
Well, it was always called the Chemical Works when I was little, rather than Newells. I didn't realise it was called Newells. I just thought it was the chemical.
Yeah.
It's odd looking at photographs and then looking at what's actually there now. Hundreds and hundreds of houses.
Yeah. It's just incredible, isn't it?
It is.
So do you have any connection with the pits as well?
My dad's dad, who was called John. John's a bit of a family name for us. Although my granddad Wilson, John Wilson, used to work down the pits, and he was quite happy because they called him Mutt. He was always a big guy, and he used to pull the ponies and the trucks because he had that strength. He was about 23 stone at one point. He was huge. Now, actually, even though having that hard time working down the pit and everything else, he lived till he was 80 odd, which was really odd. Now, when I think back to him as well, he was a young man, was working down the pits. He got the opportunity to go to Canada, and he went off to Canada, and then he got called back because my grandma was pregnant. So they weren't married at that point, so he had to come back and get married, and they had three boys. My dad was the middle one, but my granddad was a really strange character. He was very brusque, very hard. I was the first girl in the family, and he really doted on me. When I was sort of 13, 14, they used to live in Peacehaven Court, which was opposite where Usworth School was. So it's still there. So I used to often pop in. Now, my offer of a drink was always a rum and blackcurrant. So I'm being about 15. I always got that there. Really, he just seemed to sort of melt with me. It was lovely. He was a lovely guy. Remember decimalisation. By this time, my grandma wasn't very well, so she would stay in, and he would go and do the shopping. So he would take his list off her, go and get the shopping. And this was where the change sort of happened from being brusque and quite aggressive and horrible to people. My grandma then seemed to step in and rule the roost. So he would come back with the shopping. She would take it off him. She would then look at the prices of everything and change it from decimal to pound, shilling and pence, add it up, and then accuse him of stealing money off her because it never matched.
Oh, it's classic.
And she had that, it was just that change in roles, if you like. She became the bit of a tartar.
Yeah. And was that during decimalisation, or do you think that had gone on before, that she'd been in charge of the family finances?
No, she hadn't. It was sort of as they were both getting older and she became more weak and he could still go out and do it. So she just sent him out to do that. Very strange. It was lovely though, because nowadays people often don't have grandparents. I had 4 grandparents. Even though Coney died when I was about 4, I had my mum's mum till I was 11, and then my grandma died, I must have been 22, and my granddad actually saw 2 of my children, Kevin and Julia, and he must have died when Julia was about 2. So that was really good for them to have great-grandparents. They can't remember that. I do show them photographs of it.
Yeah.
But it's, it's nice. Some children, because of you start a family older, sometimes children don't even have grandparents.
That's right, actually. It's sad, isn't it? How many were in your family, your brothers and sisters?
I have one brother who's younger than me, who lives in Bishop Auckland at the moment.
Oh yeah, he was younger than you, wasn't he? Because he was still at the school when the fire happened. I remember you saying that. How did you end up getting involved with the council?
I think it was probably that meeting in Biddick when Kevin was 6, 7 months old. I thought, what? You're not going to do this to me. My priority was looking after my mum, who at that point was a wheelchair user, and bringing my kids up. So when the youngest one was 15, Washington, there was boundary review, and I stood for council first time. My husband had been a councillor. Prior to that, he'd done a couple of terms, but I decided that I would have my go when Ian was 15 and stood at that point. So I'd always been involved when the kids were little. I ran toddler groups. I was a governor. I got involved in various community things because I was fortunate in not needing to go back to work because Brian earned a good wage. I did do some work as the kids got older. I worked for Bridge Women's Education Project. I did some part-time work for them, which I quite enjoyed. I got involved through the school governor route in various aspects of the education process. I was on, when children's centres first came along in 1997, I was involved in them, which was quite good. It just sort of moved on them there, so it became natural that when an opportunity came up that I stood. So I suppose I'd probably had a good 16, 18 years of doing that community stuff before I became a councillor.
Amazing. So you've been a councillor ever since. How many years is that?
I did 2004 to 2008. Then I was unsuccessful. Then that was in Washington South. I got beat at that in 2008. Then in 2010 I was selected for Washington Central, and I've represented there ever since.
That's a serious amount of service.
But it's lovely, you know. You meet so many nice people, and there are some downsides. But on the whole, it's really nice when you can have a bit of do something for somebody. One thing really comes to mind. It must have been July, not just gone, the July before. A lady came and said, would we be able to light up the monuments for her son had a particular syndrome. And I asked about that, and it was Infant Death Remembrance Week that week, so we couldn't. So I stuck at my diary and got in touch again, and she got a week in October.
That's fantastic.
So, she was so happy for that to happen. It just makes you feel really proud to be able to do something small for somebody.
Well, we've gone into the new millennium, but I'm also thinking about the years you were growing up. You'll have seen the galleries just appear out of nowhere as well. What was that like? Did it become a hangout?
It was fabulous, and by that time we'd moved to Cllr, and because of where my mum lived in Newstead Court, was always good as years got on, that I wouldn't have to bother about parking, so I could park at my mum's and just walk straight over. So yes, when you think Princess Anne Park opening, we've had tons of different supermarkets in there. There's been Presto. There's been also when you look at the old photographs and some of the artwork, which was quite garish when you look back at it now, but was really, all new and quite exciting. So the galleries has gone through quite a lot of changes over the years to where we are. I remember things like the waterfall and the clock. That clock was, when you looked at it later, was pretty ugly. But at the time, it was more like a Punch and Judy thing, but it was fabulous, and I used to hang there. I used to take my children across the top so that you could see it when it was open. You could see straight across into where it was hanging, so you got a better view. There has been a lot going on there. Sadly, that's had a massive impact on Concord. But I think the galleries, in reality, has held pretty much its trade. Yes, the shops have had a changeover, and it's been worse in recent years, but part of that's due to the effects of COVID and people buying online. It's massive, but we still managed to keep the supermarkets. Where Asda is now, at the end bit, it used to be a tyre bay, and my brother ran that tyre bay for quite a long time as well. So yeah, very. Then we had the old leisure centre.
Oh, yeah.
Which had no parking and was horrible. And I was fortunate I represented Washington Central at that point. So when we got the funding for the new leisure centre, part of it with myself and Diane Snowden were like, the crocodile park, we need to have crocodiles in the leisure centre. So when you look at the soft plate, there are crocodiles in there. And there's also some artwork crocodiles. If you look as to where the swimming area is, we did some work with local schools to get them to come forward with it. I did the Lambton one, and I got children to put their thumbprints on everything. So Lewis, my eldest grandson, was there. Alex was not quite in nursery, but I did get one of his thumbprints in there as well. So it just so nice, those lovely little opportunities that I've had to be able to put something in because I live here. It makes me really proud. My family think I'm bonkers. And I keep saying, I'm putting all this stuff away so you can fight over it when I'm not here. Like I've made the bears. When we did Washington 50, I had fabric printed up and made some bears. I've also got some of the bunting we had, which is sitting in my cupboard, for them to fight over when I'm not here. And then I'm doing the same again with Washington 60, had some fabric printed up and gave me first bear to George Clark.
Yes. You know, the crocodiles, so you were responsible for making sure there was continuity. Can you remember where the original idea came from? I mean, like, were they always there when you were growing up, the concrete crocodiles?
Yes, and of course we lived in Newstead Court at that point, so it was just sort of, there's crocodiles, what they're doing there. It never entered my head to sort of think about, why would somebody choose crocodiles? Why would they be there? Because it does seem a little bit alien to have a crocodile. It's not even natural to the region, but it was really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just that bit, you know, when you think back about what we can do with the new leisure centre and what bits do we need to incorporate. And Diane and I looked at each and said, crocodiles, we've just got to have them.
Oh, it's classic. So, did Diane grow up here as well?
Yes.
Yeah. So you've got that sort of continuity of having seen them all the time. It's just amazing.
It's funny though, you accept it though, don't you?
You do.
You don't sort of ask where they came from or why or whose theory it was. It's really strange. I mean, I live next to Holly Park at the moment, and again, it takes you a while to realise that Holly Park was named after Stephen Holly. And you sort of think, oh, right, this is the man who... I've got the Quicker by Quango book. Obviously, you read that and you can reread it and see different things. You understand where the names have come from. When I was at, it must have been when I would be 4 or 5, our writing practice was the names of the villages. So you begin to learn them there. So in my head, I've got that little bit of a chant going on about the villages. And it was strange because there would be just words on paper. Yeah. And then you would see that development. I live in Lambton, which was one of the later developed villages. It's just sort of nice to see it all come together.
That is really interesting. I mean, it's almost like they were encouraging a sort of local patriotism or something by getting you to do that.
Absolutely. And it is very much that bit about having children to have a pride in where they live. Even though my 3 children will say, oh, Washington's boring, they all still live in Washington. Because it's just that nice place to live.
Were you aware that you'd moved from like one style of housing to another? Because you'd only be little probably when you did move.
When we moved from Cox Green, I think I was under 2. So, you know, it was that excitement of having a brand new council house. In fact, 2.
Yeah.
And then moving to Springwell. I mean, I suppose you get quite and Coach Road Estate is so big. I honestly thought everybody lived in a council house. I went to work for a bank and I didn't actually realise, at 16, I didn't realise till I started work that people actually bought houses.
Yeah.
It was like, what? You don't live on a big estate like I used to at Coach Road. It was really, really strange. But I like the concept of Washington with having different types of housing in each village. So it is about that community, a shop, a pub, Sadly, the pubs aren't doing as well, and there's a whole range of reasons around that, but schools are placed around that. And I just think it makes for a better environment. I mean, my kids have always been able to walk to school without crossing a main road, which is a positive. Sometimes it's negative on the other side when they don't have those skills to be able to do that. But it's lovely. Yeah. So we've always, we lived in Biddick when Kevin was very small, moved to Lambton, and then all the kids went to Lambton Primary, which is on the estate, and then they all went to Oxclose, which is the next village up. So they never crossed a main road, never needed to.
Yeah. And was it a shock to them to actually have to learn to cross a main road after that?
I think they were a bit surprised as they got older. But there again, you live in your own little bubble, don't you? Mm. And sometimes it was like, well, can I go and play with so-and-so in Mendip? Which was across the main road. Mm. Oh, I don't know if I want you crossing that road. Yeah. And now I think about it, and it's just normal. But at that point, it was like, I don't know if I want you going that far. Mm.
Yeah, because it felt like a big barrier. Mm-hmm. Yeah, mm-hmm. That's brilliant, though. I think that's a lot of the questions that I was going to ask you. A couple of sort of general questions I'm asking everybody, because obviously this is about Washington 60 and all the rest of it. Do you think the new town was a success, and was there anything that should have been done differently with hindsight?
I think the new town was a success. I like the communities. I think potentially some of the downside is you still have people who will say, well, I'm a sand dancer, I'm from South Shields, but then you think, but you've lived here 40 years, you haven't transferred over. There seems to be a lot of people like myself who were born and bred who have bought into it. Then people have moved in for, initially it was housing. People would move into because there were so many new houses. It's a different time, so you would potentially do things totally differently. But I think at the time it was established with the walkways and everything else, so that you wouldn't need to cross that road. You could use the walkways. As time moves on, people use what was set up as a good intention for something different. Mm. And I don't think 50 years ago, 60 years ago, anyone would have predicted the changes with the amount of car ownership we have, with how busy it is. It would never be the same. I can remember going to visit Cramlington, which was a new town as well, and that felt more clinical. I don't know if that was just because I was used to where I was, but I think we were fortunate in Washington because it was built and the green spaces incorporated into it. Yes, we've got the galleries in the middle, which I think we're pretty good at having for a town our size. Mm-hmm. Little sad that Concord doesn't get the same sort of footfall, but we can't have everything. We have Washington Village, which is still a beautiful little place, very, very pretty, and a lot of that's down to the Village and Bloom Group, who do an awful lot of work to keep it that way. Mm-hmm. But it brings you back to that historic thing. Another quick story. I've been to Washington DC a couple of times. Me and my husband went to Mount Vernon for a look, because it's got that link to Washington Old Hall. And we were standing while this American tour guide was saying, can you imagine what it would feel like being the president of the first democracy in the world signing this paper? And we were going, what? You're not the first democracy? What about us? And really strange. And people, when you talk to them about, I'm from the original Washington. All right, so where's the link? It's really strange. America is such a big country. We were in Florida one year, and Alex, my youngest grandson, was probably 5 or 6 at this point, and he would stand. We were waiting for the fireworks coming on, and my daughter and him were standing, and he was just talking, and this man had said to him, "You've got a lovely accent. Where do you come from?" And he looked up and he said, "Washington." And this guy says, "No, before before you moved from DC, where did you come from?
Yeah.
And Julia said, no, we're from Washington in the UK, not America. And he was like, oh, wow, there's a Washington in the UK. Yeah, do your history.
Yeah, we're the originals.
Yeah.
I've just thought, were you here when Jimmy Carter came over then?
I wasn't actually, well, I was living here, but I wasn't part of it. I think I'd left school by then. Yes, I had.
Yeah.
So it was mainly aimed at kids. I mean, the room was sitting in here, which is Orchard House. When I was little, I did not country dancing, I did ballroom dancing here. So it's really strange to be sitting in this room where I learned to ballroom dance.
Yes. Actually, tell us a little bit about that. Who taught it?
I'm not sure. It was whoever. I could probably find it if I looked it up, but I can't remember. It was a couple who used to open their house and teach ballroom dancing. I've got medals. It was a reasonable number of children who would come along. You know, you remember you'd have your hair all done up and wear bunny dresses, and the few boys there were would look really smart in their tended to be trousers and waistcoats, but it was just lovely, just nice to do something pretty. There is other dance schools across. This one was a very formal one.
So what was your favourite dance?
The waltz.
The waltz.
Yeah, it's lovely. You can do that rise and fall.
I was wondering what kind of music you danced to then, because I mean, I look at Strictly and they're waltzing to, sometimes to Talking Heads and things.
Yeah. I guess it would have been traditional. It was a traditional dance school. So yeah, it would have been the traditional Viennese waltz and things like that. When you watch them on Strictly doing a Viennese waltz, it's just melting, isn't it? It's fabulous to see the talent they have. Obviously, I'm nowhere near that level, but the basic steps are all there, aren't they?
That's it.
It's the way they use them.
Did you do fleckles?
Yes. Yes, I did. I remember being taught that. You had to be at that point, it was very traditional and very proper. So you weren't allowed to throw things in, it had to be all done in the right order. But really nice.
That's amazing.
Yeah, fabulous.
So was this room, were there mirrors all around?
No, it wasn't like a posh dance studio like you have now.
Yeah.
But no, it was just a lovely place to come and learn to dance. And they would do exams, in the same way as the dance schools do now, but it was just that traditional. The dance school now do everything from sort of ballroom to modern jazz, street. There's a whole range of opportunities for children to engage in dance now.
Fantastic. Do you still dance?
No, it's difficult. Nobody tends to. You don't go to a dance anymore. You used to go to a dinner dance at one point. Doesn't tend to happen now, does it?
No. We need to restart this.
Yeah, and I do think it tends to be a women-dominated area as well, doesn't it? I do think it's nice if, again, looking at Strictly, having a really good partner to dance with would be wonderful.
Is there anything else I should have asked you about and haven't?
I don't think so. I just think when you're grown up, you don't realise until later how different it was. When you read the Quicker by Quango book, you realise how things were established to be able to move forward quickly. If you went through normal planning processes, it would have taken many, many years. If you think about it, the way it was set up, they utilised what was already there, then built around, but had a plan as to which areas would develop. So that was why certain villages were finished before others. And it's nice to have the mix. And I think Washington Village is one of the more obvious areas where there are still those old properties which sort of sit there. But you can go to somewhere like Rickleton and there's an odd sort of ex-pitman's house in the middle of an estate. A pit manager's house in the middle of an estate, because it was just there. There's a house at Albany which is very similar beside the post office. So there are lots of little odd bits when you think about it. Even when Coach Road was built, there's those old houses at the top, which I can always remember told were haunted by the White Lady, which I suppose is everybody. And of course, being on going to highs with infant and juniors, you could see that from the school field, which was, you could see the ghost at the top.
And did you go looking for the ghost?
Of course. Didn't everybody at those pints? Yes. But Coach Road was so big. I mean, it's nearly 600 houses.
Yeah.
You know, you weren't going to get lost, but nobody took you to school. You went up to school yourself. You came back. Everything else, if you came back and your mum wasn't in, you knocked on the next door and they let you in. Mm-hmm. It was totally different to the way things are now.
That is so different, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm picturing you sort of growing up in that big estate, and were you aware that there were other big estates just sort of sprouting up all over the place?
No, not particularly, because I didn't go very far.
Yeah.
It wasn't until we moved to Springwell I'm thinking, wow, this is really different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, that was a different environment, because living in a workman's club wasn't the same as living in a housing estate.
Oh, that's been absolutely fascinating, Councillor Williams, and thanks so much for taking the time to chat to us.
I've loved it. It's been really nice to sort of dig back and bring those memories up. It's been fab.
That's great.
Just so proud of living here.